live. Sorry. Hi, Bella. Welcome to Venture with Grace.
Hi, guys. Good to see you. Thank you for having me here.
Okay, to start the show, I would love the audience to get to know you a little bit more. So, you started your career as a software engineer at Siemens, and then you have worked at Microsoft, Yahoo, and now you were like the most recent job was like the CISO of Atlassian and NerdWallet. So, why don't we start with like what were some core career lessons that you learned early on in your career that kind of shaped you into who you are today?
Yeah, sure. So again, thanks for having me on the show. And my career of 30 plus years is split between a lot of engineering and product development work earlier in my career, and then kind of almost accidentally switching into cybersecurity, risk management, and compliance. And I'll give I'll walk through the story of how this happened. Might be
Mhm.
interesting to some audience. So I graduated as a computer science person. I was a programmer. That's how I got my start. I built software at various companies. Like you said, I started at Siemens Communication Software, building like software on old operating systems, which many people probably don't know at this
Mhm.
point. I worked in the early part of my career. I worked at some of the key, highlights were my work at Microsoft in the mid 90s, like 1995, 96. Just to kind of date myself, I was on the browser team building Internet Explorer IE4.
Mhm.
That is like
The OG.
old. And I I came back at the Silicon Valley in the late 90s. It was kind of the era of like the whole boom of internet. It was just like it feels even more in some ways. It is like what's going on right now with AI, but AI obviously is even bigger of a change. But I joined a company called Alta Vista, which was the number one search engine of its day, and before Google came and ate our lunch. And then in 2001, there was a big stock market crash. The internet bubble busted, and many companies died, including like Alta Vista, which almost died but survived. And then I went to Yahoo, which was like, at that time was you could think of Yahoo as the combination of Google, Facebook, and Twitter all put together. Even WhatsApp, we had a messaging product. So that's where I spent a big chunk of my time building some large scale distributed systems. I was in the platform engineering team. And I also did a lot of infrastructure, and security was one of the things that I got into there. As I was there for 10 years. I've had multiple roles. And towards the very end of one of the roles where I was leading a project where we were doing some work to connect Yahoo to external partners and other social networks, and security, data security, privacy. These were huge concerns, and we couldn't go live without getting the approval from the security team, from the compliance team, from the legal team. And that's how I started to work with then Chief Security Officer at Yahoo and his team. And I really got interested in all the things I was learning in the process. And for some of the work I did there, I was even given an award called the Super Paranoid Award. The Yahoo security team was called the Paranoids.
Mhm.
And so if you hear anybody who is a paranoid in the security space, they most likely came from a Yahoo security team.
Wow.
And as part of that, the chief security officer, he asked me, "Hey, we need people like you who are doing engineering and product development to come into security. I want, that's one of the places where we see the biggest gaps on how security can work with the engineering and product teams. And you are coming from that world, so it'll be really good to have you. So that'll help us bridge some of this." So I was given a role to lead the product security team at Yahoo, and that's kind of was my first foray into security. This was like 2009 or so timeframe, and back then security was important, but it is nothing like it's today. I never thought of this as, hey, I'm switching a career and going into work in cybersecurity or anything like that. I just thought I will do that to work with this security team, which was an awesome security team at Yahoo, learn something, and then kind of go back into doing our engineering and platform and infrastructure work. But then that just didn't happen. I started to take on, I was brought in to run the product security team, but then over time just took on more responsibility in infrastructure security and then operations. And that's how I got into security. It was not planned. It was just almost, happened accidentally in some sense. And then since I left Yahoo, I've either been deputy CISO or CISO at multiple companies. Most recently, like you mentioned, I was at Atlassian, and before that, I was at NerdWallet, which was a fintech where I was one of the early employees, built out the team. I also ran bulk of the engineering team during my stay at NerdWallet, just because of my engineering background. So yeah, so kind of zooming out, I have been at enterprise and consumer companies, both public, private, done engineering work and cybersecurity compliance, risk management.
Mhm.
So yeah, like all over the place.
Mhm. I love that. I like that it's like called like the super paranoid awards. That's such an accurate thing to describe as CISO. So like, okay, so I want to start with like as a CISO of a company, like how does your budget kind of like allocated to? Because I think like a lot of startup listeners that they probably want to sell it to CISOs. I feel like CISO is like always like the most popular words in the startup industry, just because everyone's trying to sell to CISOs. Why don't we talk about like as a CISO, like first of all, like what is a day in your life kind of look like, and second of all, like how do you kind of allocate the resources from your own team, maybe like building something in house versus like buying something. Like how do you kind of allocate the money?
Yeah, so I think this varies a lot depending on the company you are at, the industry, the stage of the company. When you are joining a more early stage company or you are mid market versus large enterprise, your budgets obviously vary. So in terms of like how you think about is in the security, at least this is kind of my approach is I'll get to the budget because that's a whole different conversation about what budget you have,
Mhm,
how do you secure more budget if you need to, how do you work with the leadership team, how do you work with the board to make sure that they understand and see the return of investments in case you need more budget to achieve some objective.
mhm,
But for me, I think when I start off, I think security, in some sense, if you're in a smaller company and you don't have a large team, I think there are a few principles that have kind of served me well. Is one is try to leverage the engineering team by building an embedded security program, so you can teach, you can empower, you can enable the engineering and product development teams to actually do the right thing for security. How do
mhm,
you enable software engineers to build secure software? How do you enable software engineers to do, put in security at the design and architecture phase itself?
mhm,
So I think that's the primary thing. And of course, like security awareness is something which is not just for engineering product, but also the whole company. So in some ways, empowering people to do the right thing is the first thing you should do, because even if I'm the only person in security, I've been at companies and people ask me, hey, where do you want to start? Like, hey, I want to take advantage of the people already here and empower them to kind of like work and in some ways achieve my objectives, and
mhm,
also protect the company. So that's first thing.
mhm,
The other thing which I always think about is, hey, what, like, I think this goes back to, since we are talking about here, a lot of the audience might be startup founders and people who are building and trying to, sell to security leadership teams, CISOs or security teams. I think it's probably good to see from the other end. Um, there are, in my mind at least, there is a differentiation between solving a security problem that is unique to your organization
mhm,
and a problem that applies to pretty much everybody, right? And an example of this is, as a security leader, one of your main responsibilities is doing corporate security, where you want to make sure that you protect employees endpoints, your network, your SaaS products, and all the other software and tools that enable your business to run. And in this, most companies have a very similar pattern. Most people either use a Mac, or they, depending on the company, if you're a tech
mhm,
forward company, majority of your employees might be using a Mac, and there could be a smaller population using
mhm,
Windows. And how do you protect the endpoints? the security challenges are same across various companies, right? You want to pick the best of breed products to implement security controls
Mhm.
in places where there is, like, I would call it almost like undifferentiated risk platform. Obviously there are things still specific to the business. You could have your own, internal applications and things like that, but for the
Mhm.
large part, places where you don't have too much of a differentiation, it actually makes sense to buy these products. There's no point
Mhm.
building software when it is not a differentiated problem.
Mhm.
So I think that's one place, because usually the security teams have don't have too much of resources to go build security solutions. So you have to be
Mhm.
really really directed. So if I can buy a solution to solve a problem that maps you know to other customers, and it's a more broader horizontal problem, it makes sense to invest in third party tooling, to third party services, right? The place where you really need to be investing internally are things like building internal applications that may be specific to your business, right?
Mhm.
People are not buying this off the shelf. It's not like they're using Salesforce to do CRM, but they have some other part of their sales a workflow that has some custom tooling depending on your business. So you want to make sure that, how do you protect that? That's something custom, right? So I think that's the differentiation. And in the other bucket where things are more context specific to your business, that's where your products come in. Every company has different business. You build different products. So I think investing there to make sure that you have the right controls in the SDLC, the secure software development lifecycle. Some of the things you would do there would be a combination of using tooling and also having in-house capability, because that's where you have more unique differentiation between different companies, what they're doing depending on their business.
Mhm.
So that's the way to think about it. Where it makes sense, you buy. Where it makes sense, you build.
Mhm.
Um, and it's like, you have to be like, it's a fluid thing. You have to apply that depending on where you are and also the stage of the company.
For sure. So I'm like jogging down some notes. Number one is kind of like empowering the engineers to actually do the right thing. So like there's like that probably prevents a lot of different problems. And then the other one is like only build the stuff that are like kind of differentiate you, or like, buy everything that you could buy on the market, but like only build the stuff that are like actually necessary for the company. So I have like two piggyback questions. Maybe we'll start like from the second one. So since like from like your CISO's perspective, like you were at NerdWallet, which is like a fintech company, and also it's also like a consumer fintech company. And then on the other hand, like Atlassian is more of like a tech platform. It's like a productivity software company, right?
It's
So
mostly a B2B software, yes.
right. So like B2B software. So like basically I think those probably exposed to very different risks. Maybe like Atlassian is like focusing on like more of like a cloud security and ability to for like just like to powering these like enterprise client, and also like NerdWallet, it's probably maybe dealing with sensitive financial data or like compliance like PCI or like SOX. So why don't we talk about like what are the differentiated risk those two kind of separate sector that may be exposed to, and as a CISO, how do you kind of like process, let's say like what we need to buy or build this year to kind of like set the KPI for the team.
Yeah, so I think all businesses, whether it's a consumer business or enterprise business, there are some risks and cyber threats that are kind of uniform, and depending on any business that is of any significance, you should like expect things like ransomware attack and trying to
Mhm.
phish employees to gain internal information. These are kind of things that are similar kind of attacks you will see across any company, any industry, right?
Mhm.
I think to just kind of focus on the differentiation you were talking about, when
Mhm.
you are in a consumer business, there are a lot of risks that are quite unique.
Mhm.
One is that your products are open to everyone, and so it opens you up to much bigger threats about people using phished emails and passwords. So you can do these things called credential stuffing, where users, unfortunately, most customers reuse their passwords, and if their passwords have been compromised, that can be leveraged to attack a consumer product. And in the consumer product, you always, depending on how big is your, like NerdWallet is a good example. the scale is different.
Mhm.
You are dealing with millions of users, maybe 100, like Yahoo had 1 billion users, for instance.
Mhm.
So building security that can operate at scale is a very different challenge than building security for a more of an enterprise product where it might not be the same scale. On the so there are different kinds of risks that, like, a DDoS kind of attack is more likely to happen to a consumer business versus a B2B business. Not that a B2B business cannot have that attack, but more likely to see those kind of threats on a consumer business. Similarly, on the consumer business, data privacy, most consumer businesses might be collecting more sensitive personal data, and there's a lot of privacy regulations around that. So a company which is doing those kind of consumer businesses have to kind of keep that in mind. When it comes to enterprise businesses, the difference there is, even if they are slightly different in terms of scale from a user perspective, they are more mission critical. The in the case of like consumer businesses, like the classic adage, most things are free, and when you're not paying for a service, then like they say, you are the product, if you're not paying for the product. And so in the enterprise, you actually have a lot more obligation to your customers. You have much higher expectations from compliance perspective, especially if you are operating in a regulated space, or if your customers, you have customers who are in regulated space like healthcare, fintech. You have much higher obligations when it comes to maintaining a security posture and being compliant with various compliance frameworks. So, and then there, I think the risks really are about, there could be, like, lots of things that can go wrong from a security perspective
Mhm.
that can be really detrimental to the business. If your service goes down, usually in the contract you have, clawback clauses where if the service is down at a business, you may be liable to pay for that. So things like that could be really, really detrimental to a large company. Then, of course, like, security incidents at a consumer company is bad, but in the enterprise businesses, it can pretty much be business ending events, because a big part of enterprise business is you're kind of the stewards of a lot of sensitive information from your customers, which are other businesses. And if you lose that, it could be really, really a bad day for your customers, and of course, in turn, also for you as a company. So those are kind of, at a very high level, very different kinds of risk, different kinds of risk threshold and impact if something were to go wrong. So you kind of plan accordingly. So anyway, that's a very high level, and we can dive deeper into any specific area you want to go.
Totally. I wonder, so maybe we could start with like, you know, what would be on your checklist as a CISO, like coming in? So maybe, let's say if, like, I'm sure like a lot of our listeners maybe are like founders in the early stage. Let's say they just raised like a seed round. Should they be thinking about security from the start? Or I'm sure they should, but like, I guess like a lot of people don't invest into like the CISO until maybe let's call it like Series B, or when they have more money or like more skill up on the process. How do you think about like, let's say they just raised like, a $5 million seed run, and then what should they do in terms of security?
Yeah. So just to make sure that I understand the question, you're talking about a company. You're not talking about a security vendor that has raised money, but any business,
Any
anybody's doing
business.
any
Yeah.
venture. Yeah.
Yeah.
So couple of things. One is, again, depends on what kind of business you're building. Are you in a regulated space versus not? If you're not in a, sometimes if you're building a gov tech, for instance, or you're
Mhm.
building something for a finance industry, there, your business, even you can't even like take off if you don't have certain level of security controls. You don't have compliance certification. You can't be in a healthcare business if you are not, HIPAA certified, for instance, right?
Mhm.
And so I think those are the kind of places where you, in some ways, have to invest from early on, right?
Mhm.
But I think a general advice to founders. I know this may sound a little strange coming from somebody who leads security team, is that in the very beginning, you're, as a founder, what you're trying to do is a couple of things: to find product market fit, and you are also trying to discover who are your ideal customers. And so when you're doing that, I think your focus should be on building that and kind of getting traction there. I think security is important. I mean, don't do stupid things, but you do need to like focus on that because your risk threshold as a company is much lower, right? You have
Mhm.
to, your risk is to kind of stay alive, right? So you want to make sure that you have the runway you can have with the money you've raised to get to the point where you have your first customer, you have hit 100,000 in revenue, or first signed up customer, even like, that's a big milestone for a startup.
Mhm.
So I think in those kind of situations, in the very beginning, if you have very small revenue set, I think, and your still product is evolving, I think I would say that security, you should again like contract. You don't need to think about hiring somebody in house. Make sure that you are using existing services, tooling, and try to be as bootstrapped as possible. But always keep in mind that when you're designing things, that you are thinking about, hey, what happens when if we were to grow today, we have only one customer, what happens when we have 10, or today we have like just 10 customers, 10 users versus having 100,000. So keeping that in the mind as you're designing is the more important thing. But frankly, as a startup founder, unless you're in a very regulated space, I think the most important thing you can focus on is how you can survive as a business. Because I always like to say, what's the point of having the most secure business if there is no customer, or if the business dies because you cannot get traction? I think that's the most important thing. But again, of course, if you're in a regulated space, you have to focus on this from early on, because otherwise you cannot even think about approaching a customer.
Mm. I wonder, so like I guess like for a security startup, let's say like a AI security startup that are building in the security space, what are some trends that you're seeing? And then I guess like is there like any particular companies that you feel like are building something really exciting in the space? It doesn't have to be particular company, but like I guess particular
Yeah,
function or use case.
yeah, I have to be. I work with right now. I'm working as advisor at a couple of venture firms and also advising a bunch of startup founders. So I have to be very careful to name companies,
Mhm,
and also like I don't want to come off as those are my favorite children or something like that.
mhm,
So I think in general, what I'm seeing is the two things that are very interesting that I would have not guessed going in, but I do see is the adoption of like AI
mhm,
um, products, adoption of Gen AI
mhm,
products. Like I would not have expected them to be adopted at the scale I see them being adopted at large enterprises,
mhm,
or adopting. Like a classic example of this is things like coding tools, like a Cursor or a Windsurf
mhm,
or your Copilot. The level of adoption at large enterprises of something that is very new,
mhm,
these tools have a lot of things that yet need to be figured out. Like these are built on LLMs that are not deterministic, and so there is a lot of room for making errors. Like with Cursor, you could be building software that may have inherent vulnerabilities. We know software development, even though it does great job for prototyping, and once you start to go into production, you need a lot more maturity. But that is what I see, that the adoption of these at enterprises is surprising. One of the biggest challenge for startups is how do you get in the door to get your company be able to even sell product by meeting the requirements on compliance, the procurement teams, and just in general, like just to get yourself going in an enterprise. You always start, most of the companies would start with like like a PLG motion, product led growth, or small to medium business, and then go up market. That was what the norm was in most cases. But now it's almost like I'm seeing the reverse in many situations, where larger companies are adopting these new startup product services in a way that is surprising to me, to be honest.
mhm,
So in some ways, you have to be prepared to, depending on what you're building, you may actually get more traction. And when I've zoomed out and looked at it, hey, why is that the case? It also is because the kind of problems these larger enterprises have, those are problems of scale. And in some ways, AI is some of the AI, cybersecurity products and tools, they do really well when you have to deal with a large, complex environment, a lot of data. I think those are the kind of natural fit about the problem and the solution. That's probably why you see a lot of the large enterprises more willing to give this a shot.
Mhm.
And the second is everybody wants to adopt, right?
Mhm.
Um, like you pick any CEO of a Fortune 100, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, the CEOs, the boards are asking, hey, what is our strategy on adopting AI, right? Everybody wants to be on adopting this because they see the clear,
Mhm.
value in ROI and efficiency gains that come with this. So I think that is like, I think I've heard, I don't know how, I probably shouldn't name the name of the company, but there's a large bank, like one of the top like two or three banks, where they bought licenses for every developers in their company to use one of these coding tools. It's almost like a mandate to make sure that everybody is using it. That is such a phenomenon that I would have never expected,
Mhm.
even in my wildest dreams. But that's where things are. So that's one thing I noticed: adoption by enterprises. Um, on the other end, about security vendors who are building products and trying to address a lot of the challenges customers have, both mid SMB and also enterprises. There I see the trend that there are a lot of problems in the cybersecurity space that have been there with us forever.
Mhm.
You know, anything you pick: identity and access management, vulnerability management, DLP. These are problems that have existed forever, and there's been lots of development in this area, but still there were lots of gaps because of
Mhm.
the technology didn't exist to go solve some of the problems that were. It just was not possible to solve some other problems. But now with I see this clear opportunity for people to go solve existing problems with
Mhm.
leveraging these new technology capabilities, things that allow you to, reason and have work with unstructured data and things like that. That was really not possible. And a classic example of this is, you see a lot of traction there as well. Like you see in the AI based security ecosystem, vendors who are really like, where you see a lot of traction are things like SOC automation, right? So these are like, we know there is a big challenge both in terms of tooling and also in terms of just number of people you have, resources you can have to go solve this problem. So the problem has been there with us forever, and now there is actually possibility for building some agentic solution so that you can augment existing staff in your SOC. With fewer people you could do more. And the some of the most frequent things in a SOC you need is to do things that are, in some ways, when you're doing investigation, you are doing data analysis. And to be able to use an AI native product where analysts can ask questions in plain English, and the system can then go and figure out the complex mechanism to get the answer, really like is a game changer. In traditional, before you had an AI driven approach, you would have to build your own detections rules. You have to build your own mechanisms to do search through logs, and do all these, like, take all this telemetry and then do
Mhm.
analysis. This required a lot of effort. It slowed things down when you had an incident. And it just was, you need more training, you need more expertise, and all of this were lacking. So those are kind of places where I see a very natural fit, where the product actually can solve the problem, because they have the capability. Like I mentioned, they can work with data, they can do things where they can correlate a lot of telemetry to come up with the right answer. So those are kind of places where there's natural adoption. The other place I've seen a lot of traction is data security.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, from if you ask as a CISO, you go into any company, protecting your customers' data is probably the most number one. Those are like the kind of the crown jewels of any company. You could lose a lot of things, like even your internal data. It will be a bad day. But if you lose customers' data,
Mhm.
it would be again like a business ending event. So in that space, DLP solutions have been around for a long time, and many of them were very brittle. They were mostly rules based, or even the classification engines they would have behind the scenes were kind of like very rudimentary. Lots of false positives and also like lots of false negatives where things would be missed.
Mhm.
And and in the DLP, even during my own time at various companies, the DLP is data loss prevention. People always are trying to do the data loss, detection, but very few people have the confidence to turn on the protection bit automatically, because if they make a wrong decision, that could have business impact, it could impact production, and people didn't have the confidence to do this, and that's why most companies would be very, very timid to like actually apply the last bit of DLP, which is the prevention. But now with AI, you have a lot more confidence in how you can do this the right way, and you see a lot of vendors who are really having a lot of success. And so I feel like DLP finally, like, oh my god, like we can actually have a solution that can solve these problems in a way that has not been possible.
Mhm.
So quite exciting to see like the opportunity to go solve a lot of vulnerability management, source code analysis, things like that. There's a lot of stuff here where existing problems can be solved. But I'll add one more thing just to close out this, is that then there is a new class of risks. These are, I would call, like AI native risks,
Mhm.
things like deepfakes and other like things that are very, very AI native risks. And so that's a net new category of risk, which like Gen AI products being adopted inside company, right? Prompt injection. These are new things which most CISOs didn't have to worry about 2 years back. So that's a different class of problem. So there's a lot of still unknowns. The threat landscape there is still evolving. You see all these new things coming in, like MCP is a capability to connect LLMs to tools and other services. So as a CISO, that like really scares me, because I don't know what controls you have in this protocols. You have
Mhm.
the agent to agent protocol that was just announced at Google I/O. And so there's a lot of things evolving there. So there also, that creates opportunities for security vendors to go attack them, because this thing is such a novel space with almost like emerging risks. I think
Mhm.
this kind of place where a CISO can leverage a vendor who can go and solve these problems for them, because this is so new. They can't internally be investing too much in that.
Mhm. I wonder, so okay, so I wanna maybe we can feature like a audience question. So Steven asked, are you seeing the same kind of intelligence AI being applied not only as salary software engineering, but also enhanced developer security architecture, training and awareness and enterprise environment? More interested in proactive, secure mindset of AI.
So if I understand the question, I think the question is how AI is being adopted within companies to run their business. Is that what is the question? Um,
I
since yeah.
It's
So I think the
a very
question
big
really is,
question.
yeah, that's a long question. I had to read it again. So I think the question is like how companies are adopting AI to accelerate product development and build software, deploy software. What are we doing from a security also to leverage AI to support that kind of an ecosystem where things are moving really fast?
Mhm.
Yes. So I think the initial piece of adoption is happening because it's like the adoption of code gen tools, because that's
Mhm.
been one of the most like breakthrough applications of the LLMs in enterprises. You can see companies like Cursor. I just like was recently reading, like just last week, a story that they hit a $500 million top line revenue in whatever, like in a year, which is kind of insane. So there, the need is very obvious and the motivation is there. So people are building software using these tools. It just means that the volume of software is super high, right? So if you are building like 10x, 100x more code and putting that into your SDLC, CI/CD pipeline, existing solutions probably were not designed to handle that, right? So you can't have the traditional tooling, both at, let's say, at the coding stage to run scanners and things like that, and also like other controls you may have during the deployment phase, and then of course controls in the production, they all have to evolve because they cannot just keep up with the volume of things coming in and the risks it is introducing, right? So one kind of framework, mental framework I have been kind of thinking about is these kind of AI problems can only be solved with AI,
Mhm.
right? So you have to have adoption of tools to AI-driven security tooling is the only way you can, in some ways, like provide security controls in an environment where product development, code, and deployment is like heavily going towards a model where there is a lot more leveraging of AI capabilities, Gen AI in particular.
I wonder, so like I wanna maybe this is like a adjacent question. So like I listed out like a few core security kind of like famous security companies like kind of area. And then maybe we could discuss like on like, if each of these are kind of like could be revolutionized by AI, aka like there will be like a new winner coming out of it versus like just the current um security platform can actually just be more AI-ified to keep serving the audience. As yesterday, I was like chatting with the former CEO of like BigCommerce, so he was like he kind of mentioned about like since he used to be like a VP of PayPal, and then he worked at like um fintech as well as like travel tech. So like basically, he was saying like a lot of the AI companies are not like you basically mentioned like AI native. So like a lot of the companies a lot of like the industry, so for example, fintech or whatever, he doesn't think they would be revolutionized by AI, aka there will be like new winners coming out, but the existing winners are gonna kind of adapt quickly to use AI to keep maintaining their status or like market share. But there are, for example, healthcare or like some other sector that actually could be like having new winners coming in, basically. So I feel like maybe this idea could apply to security as well. So the first category is identity access management. So currently we have Okta, which is like single sign-on and identity management, and then Auth0, which is part of Okta right now. And then we previously also in this category, I believe there's also Stitch, which is another one that
Well, of
like
course, Microsoft Entra, which is most people in Microsoft ecosystem, which is a very large ecosystem in enterprises, they use Microsoft Entra ID.
okay, so this one you think it will not be kind of like replaced by new AI ecosystem.
No, I don't think that is the case, at least from my perspective.
Mhm,
Um, Maybe kind of zooming out a little bit, I
mhm,
think the incumbents do have some advantages, right?
mhm,
They come primarily in the form of two or three things. One is the fact that they are already in an enterprise, right? So they've gone through the vetting process. And as a CISO, you have a little bit of a less risk to take with a
mhm,
known larger enterprise who's like, you mentioned Okta. For me, it's easier in some ways to kind of adopt an AI, capability from Okta because, hey, I'm already in this platform and I have higher trust at this company that they are doing the right thing. So, for me, it's a low risk, way to go extend what is there. That's one thing from a buyer's perspective. The other is the fact that, at the end of the day, what is the differentiation is data, right? If you don't have access to data, you really can't like, fine tune your models or build new capabilities using LLMs to come and disrupt. So in some ways, these companies have access to data from forever, right? You've been using these tools forever, and so that gives them an inherent advantage that they
mhm,
could go train their own model using this trove of data they have. Not always, something they can do by default because there's also like legal and privacy like driven complications that kind of prevent companies from going and without permission willy-nilly just use customer data to go train their models, but they do have a data advantage, right?
mhm,
But at the same time, I think this is the classic innovator's dilemma,
mhm,
right? These companies have existing businesses, they have a roadmap full of things they want to do. they are still like, mired in all the things they need to deliver, which have nothing to do with AI, right?
Mhm.
So, and they have to run operations for a large enterprise, uptime, making sure that you have all the security controls in
Mhm.
place to just protect your existing business. They are growing, but one big part of their responsibility is to protect, right, the existing business, along with thinking about growing the new business. So this
Mhm.
always leads to this very, like, this is classic innovators dilemma. People have to balance the two. I mean, Google is the greatest example of that, what's going on here, even though they have all the AI advantage, both technology and people who have the expertise, but they are being in some way outrun by a company like OpenAI, right?
Mhm.
So I think IAM, let's pick an example of IAM. You see so many new startups coming into this space,
Mhm.
right? And I think there is room for startups here to, in some ways, sidestep and kind of come without any baggage and solve a problem in a very, different and novel approach that could be very unique, might be hard for incumbents to do quickly. So I am of a strong belief that there is all these, I mentioned all these problems, right? IAM has been this problem has been with us forever, and DLP and SOC automation. I think that yes, existing players can get into it, but I think that as a startup coming into this, you are an AI native company. You're coming from a very different viewpoint. You're attacking this problem from a very, very different approach, right? So you have a higher chance of building something that is truly like a game changer. Maybe it is the right thing to do to solve an AI native problem. Your AI native solution is the right way to solve this. So I think that other than data moats for large companies and the fact that they are already in, they have a large customer base, I think that is their true moat in some sense. But otherwise, in terms of coming up with more innovative solutions, a startup has so much more advantage over a large company, just because the large company's attention is diffused because they're doing many, many things. So yeah, I wouldn't be discouraged as an entrepreneur. In fact, it just means you have to identify the right go-to-market strategy, or identify the right ideal ICPs for yourself, ideal customer profiles. Um, and of course, the other thing for me, the indication is the dollars going in this market,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I see it's like it definitely feels like the previous, internet rush, when it was like companies are getting left, right, and center, like being funded. I feel like it's happening even more. Um, I see companies reading, say, seed stage. They raise at like a $50 million valuation, which is kind of almost insane. Like, so those are like larger than usual A rounds, and so there is money going in there, which is a clear, indication that there is a lot of opportunity here.
I totally agree with you on like, solving like an AI native problem. So another thing, I mean, I this is like just on top of my mind because of maybe recency bias, but like also like just it was a really memorable conversation. So yesterday on our chat with the former CEO of like BigCommerce, he also mentioned about the go-to-market strategy for like companies. He basically said like like the when you are focusing on a lot of the small companies, you are, let's say you're serving small companies, but you are, let's call it like 80% cheaper than your first competitor that are like a big competitor. You are more likely to succeed than you are focusing on like, or like you are like you are pricing yourself like a lot higher but serving big companies. So I wonder what's your thought on like, I'm maybe butchering this idea. Maybe this is like me how I internalize whatever he said. This is maybe not his original idea, but I just want to make sure. But anyway, so that's my takeaway from our conversation. So I wonder in the security market, like I only hear about big companies spending money onto security problems. Like do you agree with the idea on like, creating a product that solves like a bunch of small companies problem in the security space versus should I focus on my energy on selling to like the major enterprise to land like a few big logo?
Yeah, I think this kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier about the trend where I see, which is kind of unique in some senses, adoption of a lot
Mhm.
of the more innovative AI native solutions by large enterprises,
Mhm.
and which is not a trend that is That's not like it's something you would expect in a normal situation, right? And like I also mentioned that some of these problems are very unique. Like some of the complex problems for which AI is the right way to solve it also is a problem for large enterprises. That's where you see the traction. The other thing is, in some ways, like CISOs don't have much of a choice, but have to deal with it. Like imagine I'm in a company, there is no way that I can try to like restrict adoption of AI tools within the company. Like I said, the CEOs and the boards are actually really, they are asking why are you not using more of it? Like why are we not like leveraging all these AI capabilities to drive innovation, efficiency? So there's a lot of pressure on them to do
Mhm.
this. Now, as a CISO, I'm still responsible, for protecting the enterprise, protecting our customers. So you can't build some things yourself because you don't have the AI, knowledge or capabilities. There are very few security teams other than large companies like Google, Facebook, who have data
Mhm.
scientists and machine learning experts in your security team, right? So you really can't build it, and you do have to go protect some of these risks, new risk vectors created from adoption of AI, especially Gen AI. So
Mhm.
you have to use something from outside because you have no choice. So you definitely see traction as a result of that, right? The converse is also true, right? If you're a smaller company, your overall risk profile itself is, in some ways, your risk threshold is much higher.
Mhm.
So you could, adopt and maybe take more risk in some sense. So yeah, there is a little bit of an asymmetry created here where like it might actually be more easier in some sense for security vendors to get traction at larger, kind of go more top down versus bottoms up in their
Mhm.
go to market strategy. And that is true. I think I see that.
Mhm.
uh, this is also the reason why you see this acceleration of revenue growth of these companies.
Mhm.
It used to take 2 years, 3 years to get to 5 million to 10 million, and now you see companies that are like hitting like these milestones of 5, 10, $50 million in a much more compressed window. And that is because they are selling into large enterprises. That's because they are getting large ACVs in their
Mhm.
average like contract value for things they are selling. So that is definitely that's a trend. I mean, these kind of signal to me that yeah, there is more of a top-down adoption going on of security tooling.
Mm. I wonder, so like, okay, so I also want to be mindful of the time. Maybe we do one real question and then a quick 1 minute fire round. Okay. So I think like lately, I feel like there's a few companies, besides like, obviously, I was gonna go down the list, like for endpoints, security and device security, there's like, CloudStrike, Sentinel-1, and then for cloud security and posture management, there's like Wiz, Palo Alto Network, and Orca Security. So for Wiz, I feel like it's definitely popping up because of like the acquisition offer and stuff like that. So like it's like in the news all the time. So why do you feel like it was such a like a fast growing security cloud security platform that kind of like really pop off these few years? Also, I was gonna say Vanta as well, just because like the security compliance space, like I feel like, like obviously there's like Drata or like
Right.
Tugboat Logic in that category, but like I feel like Vanta was also popping up too. So why did these two company kind of like really pop up lately?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I feel like Wiz is now in a very different era where they're going to be part of a large company, and
Mhm.
like it's yet to be seen how can they keep up with the pace of innovation they've
Mhm.
had that has led to where they are, to have an exit at the $30 billion plus. Um, so I don't want to like I have my own hypothesis of why
Mhm.
these companies were so successful, but I don't have any real like information, insider information to kind of corroborate what I'm saying. So I had to say this
Mhm.
with a grain of salt. I'm just taking in some ways making an educated guess from
Mhm.
outside, and also having seen Viz at companies, and also like knowing the team, meeting the founders, and kind of getting a bit of a behind the scenes look at the technology. I think in some ways, like like Viz did something where they were existing players there were lots of other players, like you mentioned Orca, but there are also other players who were in the market for a while to do, to implement cloud security. Cloud
Mhm.
migration was, in earnest, it really took off in the 2010s, right? 2012, 2015 is when you saw this mass adoption,
Mhm.
right? So this cloud security problem, again, it's like AI. It's a net new problem. Nobody was thinking about it because everything was on-prem, and now you have this very new environment which you need to go secure. Then to make even things complex, there are multiple hyperscalers. So people are building, they're using AWS, they're using other hyperscalers like Azure and GCP. So this created a new landscape in some sense, and there was a need for building a net new solution with
Mhm.
this new complex landscape that
Mhm.
kind of opened up a window for somebody to come in and disrupt that. I think that's was the market opportunity. I would say timing in the case
Mhm.
of Wiz was a big, tailwind for them.
Mhm.
But also, you cannot take it away from the fact that they built a really awesome product. Um, I
Mhm.
mean, I have not seen a product that people, it's like, they call it customer love for a
Mhm.
product and like literally spread by word of mouth. And the very first time, just to give an example, now many years back, like when they had just started, CISO network is a very small network. We
Mhm.
talk to each other. And the very first time I heard about Wiz was from this, again, a Fortune 500, let's say, maybe they're in Fortune 100 bank, a CISO.
Mhm.
They were raving about Wiz that they adopted and it really was a game changer for them. And I was like, what is this company again? Wiz? Who are these people? And the fact that they were able to get into this company and actually show value, I immediately knew, oh wow, there is something different here, right? So
Mhm.
the product was very easy to use. It had great visualization to kind of see end to end how your cloud, footprint looks like, how things are connected, how a risk can actually materialize.
Mhm.
So I think they did a lot of very unique product, innovations.
Mhm.
That probably was one of their secret sauce for success. And also, I think they had a really good go-to-market teams, and they just built on the momentum. So that's Wiz. It's a very unique situation, right? There are very few companies like Wiz that have gone on to be as big and at the pace they did. Like they were the fastest growing company to hit 100 million in revenue. Right
Mhm.
now, maybe they are being challenged by other AI native companies. Um, so yeah, so Wiz is different, frankly. What was the second part of your question? You mentioned that.
Oh, the other one's like Vanta. It's also like a really popular company lately.
Vanta is again clear, need in the market for building, kind of solving a problem that was very, very manual and
Mhm.
time consuming, and frankly, like most of the teams, like didn't love doing that work. I know I've been in companies where I've managed the compliance teams,
Mhm.
and it's like an auditor coming around, people are just trying to go hide because they have to deal with the compliance analysts coming in. But Vanta made it like use technology to solve this problem. And some of the things Vanta did was Vanta and Drata and other companies like that.
Yeah.
Instead of having a
Got it.
point in time compliance check,
Mhm.
this is now more continuous because they were using technology. So you could know if you are out of compliance like in real time, right, or near real time, right, instead of waiting for doing like the traditional annual compliance like audit, right. So I think that was a both these places, like even in GRC space,
Mhm.
I see, again, I won't name names, but I see companies coming in and really disrupting because they're able to leverage AI,
Mhm.
especially like, we all know about like, AI SOC companies. There's like so many of them out there now.
Mhm.
Similarly, like, you see some areas where there is definitely like very much of a heat. IAM is
Mhm.
one, data, DLP is one. In GRC space, I also see similar things where there is, I'm pretty sure Vanta and Rata, they are working on enhancing their platforms, but I also see a lot of innovation coming there. And I feel like in some ways, those are slightly low risk.
Mhm.
I'm not saying they are not risky at all, but you can adopt a tool where your error tolerance could be a little higher because you have,
Mhm.
you make a mistake in the way you assess the state of compliance or controls to make sure that you're compliant. And if the an AI driven solution makes a mistake, because we know that none
Mhm.
of these LLMs or even like, your own internal trained models, they all have like, they're non-deterministic. So, but an error, you have some layers of control. There is an actual auditor from outside who's going to validate the response and the
Mhm.
data collected by AI. So to me, that's like in some ways, hey, this is even easier for adoption because the error threshold is higher, right?
Mm, for sure. I want to be mindful of the time. Okay, maybe we wrap with a 30-second fire round. What's your
Okay.
favorite book?
My favorite book. I have been. The first honest answer is that I don't really have. I have kids, and I really don't have time. I have lots of books that are like in various state of being read. My main source of information these days is podcasts and
Mhm.
reading things online. But when it comes to books, there are some classic ones that I really. An area which is of my big interest is, you know. Called behavioral economics or just psychology in general, because as a security person you're dealing with situations where you have to have a lot of EQ and kind of understand what makes people work. So there are books in that category. There's like, obviously there are books by Robert Cialdini, who's like an expert in this area about how influence works, because many times security is all about influence. So those are areas. There are books where, kind of blanking on some names in that, like influence related books are the ones that are super interesting to me. There is another one of my favorite books is a book by Chris Voss. It's called Never Split the Difference.
Oh yeah, he was on the pod. Chris was on
Oh,
the
you're
pod.
the report. Oh my God. Like
Yeah.
I love his stories. He was an FBI hostage
Mhm.
negotiator, and like his stories are just like amazing. It's like it's very very full of like kind of like hacks you can use in your day to day.
Mhm.
That things he learned from a very very different scenario, which he was a hostage negotiator.
Mhm.
But also like his writing is so funny, and I've heard him on podcasts. He even has this amazing tone with which he
Mhm.
speaks. I love Chris Voss. That's one book. Yeah. Um, so yeah, that's a
Um,
long-winded answer. Don't really have a specific book I want to recommend.
wow. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I I think early on, some of the like I would say even that whole move to go from being in engineering into product.
Mhm.
So the chief security officer at Yahoo, his name was Arturo, and GK. These are people like who, in some ways, like gave me some, opened my mind to something new. So I would say that these are kind of people like who were influenced to like kind of do something that I would have never thought I would get into, right? So they were
Mhm.
inspiring enough that, hey, there is something here that is interesting, and an opportunity to work with them to learn and grow. I think those are kind of some of the things that stand out for me.
Who would you invite to a dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party?
Mhm.
Uh, I was going to say some politicians, but I don't want to do that and get into trouble. Um, the person who I think transcends time in some sense is, at least I'm from India, so like Gandhi, Mahatma
Mm,
Gandhi. He's like, I mean, every time I read and things he has done, it's just he will be remembered for the ages. 100 years from now, people will know about him. So I think a person like him, to be in their presence,
mm,
forget about talking to them, just being in their presence would be something that I would die for it.
mm. Where can we find you outside of work?
I'm mostly I'm I don't do too many things social. I don't even have a Facebook account, for instance. I am mostly consumer at the social, like X. I find X to be a super helpful place to learn. But in terms of like, my social presence is very limited. I'm most active on LinkedIn,
Mhm,
and if somebody wants to reach out, that's the place they can. That's where I pay. That's where I check things every day, because
mhm.
that's where I spend most of my time when it comes to socials.
Love, amazing. Well, Bala, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was such a master class for security and AI, security AI.
No, thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed this conversation. And also, I really congratulations on all the success you've had. This is amazing platform you've built from very humble beginnings to where you are. So that's super impressive. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm crying. Thank you so much, Bala. Also, thank you for speaking at the conference. You're amazing.
You're welcome. Good to meet you again, Grace.
Awesome. Let me quickly end stream. Sorry.